All right, folks, thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here. I rarely do get an opportunity to speak at conferences outside of UK, but what's lovely is that now we can do it online, and I'm here with you, so I'm delighted to be here. Just a few words before I get on with the material, with the content. I have a little baby that is next door from me with his mom, and hopefully he's gonna behave very well. But if you hear a sudden cry or anything like that, don't be alarmed. He's absolutely safe. It might just interrupt the transmission for a second or two. Hopefully that's not going to happen. He's very happy today. Although he just started crying, I hear, so you never know. But anyway, yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry, I'm just gonna show you a few things here before we begin. So I wanted to say at the beginning that the presentation today is going to be probably quite a bit different from all the other materials that you see at the conference, at this particular conference, because I want to focus on actually teaching accessibility. And the reason for that is that lots of you would work with accessible technology, accessible solutions, you'd be employing it to build accessible training and other things. But very often you'd also have to educate people about web accessibility itself. And this is something that I specialize in, talking about web accessibility, demonstrating it, showing it, explaining it. And so this presentation, I am aiming at people who are explaining web accessibility to others, but also those who basically frequently run any kind of online training. There'll be things in it that I think all of you will find useful. Obviously, there'll be time for questions, so you can either ask them in the meantime. I'm looking at the chat, and if not, we can just have that at the end. So yeah, basically this is me. I'm in Edinburgh, UK. I'm Polish though. I was born in Poland a long time ago. I'm much older than I look. I'm told. And I'm a web accessibility specialist. So that means that indeed I help companies do things right, the right way. I help software development teams mostly, but also user experience design teams, but also lots of governmental work for employees of the government to help them in the public sector, to help them produce documents and things that work for as many people as possible. I speak at conferences, often in the UK, often in Europe, like I say, not too often in the States, so that's one of the first opportunities. I'm very grateful for it. Let's begin and get on with it. So the most important bit for me is as when I talk about accessible things, I need to always remind myself that it's very difficult actually. This stuff that we are doing day and night is actually very difficult to grasp on. This is a highly complex technical domain. It requires a lot of knowledge about coding, standards, user experience design, usability, content design, marketing and product management, and many other disciplines. And so this is something that is very important, especially as there is no single way of learning about it properly, or there are some certificates and other things a person can do, courses, but you can get information from anywhere, most of all through practicing, and it just takes a long time. So what I think often happens is we don't really realize how daunting it can be for someone who's first encountering it to actually get a grip on it. Like, it can be just a massive issue. And we're talking here about things that, people do in order to make their training, accessible or something like that. Whereas now I'm actually referring to teaching a highly complex domain. That's a very difficult task. So the way I'm thinking at it, whoever wants to learn about web accessibility with me, they always get an A at the start. Not that I'm scoring anything, but if I were, they would be getting A at a start. Just because it's such a big effort to even go for it. So I give people a lot of benefit of a doubt, the confidence that they can actually do it, because even just by starting this journey, they have done more than majority of the population that is involved in designing digital content and software and similar solutions. That's very important because it's framing the focus right. People like to feel appreciated, they like to feel valued. So if you approach any kind of technical training, particularly web accessibility training, this way, that's really setting you ahead, and it gives people the correct expectation to have. So my philosophy is that if I make it interesting enough for them, they will learn things that will be just helpful in their practice and they will come for more. That's the idea. Now, the other observation I have from years of doing this, and that's something that's now amplified by the incredible amount of AI slop and things you find on LinkedIn and infographics and whatnot. Doing accessibility, being a web accessibility professional and teaching it are two very different things. I know lots of experts in web accessibility who are terrible teachers, and I know some wonderful teachers of web accessibility who do not have that much of practical expertise. Rarely though. I mean, usually what happens is people who are very, very good at teaching it are very good experts, but it just doesn't happen too often in general. There aren't too many good teachers, right? So I think the issue here is that we very often stay focused on screens, WCAG, standards, ADA, Section 508, European Accessibility Act in Europe where I work, and many other kind of technicalities and peculiarities of the thing. But we're not really interested in the human experience, really, because it's so interesting to be embedded in the world of so many gadgets and technologies, assistive technologies, screen readers, whatnot. What I want to always take this experience down is to kind of get to the very human experience of somebody who is interacting with a machine. So I think what's really important is we need to know how to understand the kind of WCAG, WCAG part of things, but also how business limits or enables accessibility, what expectations people might have towards it, and so on. That's like a kind of, pre-word to what I want to really say today. I want to give you some tips on building great accessibility training. I would like to emphasize not so much building accessible training, although that's the point. And of course, I would assume that any training you would engage in would be made in an accessible fashion or done in an accessible fashion. So I take it as a given, but it's to do with building great accessibility training, right? 10 tips with a little bonus. The important bit is to remember you can't make a training session that works for everyone. Like that's not gonna happen. And you cannot make a conference talk that works for everyone. So some people would go, some people would stay, some people would feel you did a great job, some other people would feel that this wasn't fantastic at all. But I think that, if you can give different groups of people different experiences, but at the end, that at the end works for them, and they just have a good time, then you are golden, you are set. The important bit is that if we have slides or anything like that, like with any other product, training is your product. They don't need to work for you, they need to work for other people. So this takes me to my first tip for you, right? We need to understand our students. I mean, how often are we engaged in training sessions where somebody booked us to walk into a company or, a public office or anything like that, and we are faced with people who are just sitting there and looking at us, and we see them for the first time, they see us for the first time, we want to talk to them about things, but we don't really kind of know them at all, right? Now, this is an experience, this is a product, so we should know our customer. If we are very experienced in that situation, then we'll manage. Like, I can walk into a room of any people and talk about anything, but I have ADHD and I can talk and I love it and I love performing on stage. I don't mind. Not everyone is like this, and that's absolutely normal. Like people have different styles of expression, different levels of knowledge, different level of confidence. So not everyone would be able to do that. So they need to know the audience. They need to know the people who are there in front of them. I want to know who these people who come to my training are. What are they doing? When I started emailing Luis, I asked, hey, who are these folks who are going to be coming to my session? And, the answer helped me a bit, I want to hear about these people's challenges, Sometimes I send my customers a short form to fill, digital form, accessible, of course, in which they can say, what do they do, what issues do they face. I write them individual email introductions, I look at them on LinkedIn. I'm doing some research, and here, of course, the thing is like nowadays everybody wants to use like AI to automate things, like send automated email invitations, and like I don't like that. I mean, if somebody comes to your training session, they are there because they want to learn from you and they are investing their time in it. So it needs a personalized touch. It's very important. When I used to run training sessions face-to-face, which used to be the case before the pandemic a lot, I would always greet everyone personally at the door, to the class, personally, like ask them name and, how are they doing, shake their hand. It's super important. And of course, it goes without saying that you'd approach teaching web developers differently to, let's say, UX designers, right? But it's even deeper than that. We need to care for people on a more personal level, like I said. What are their pronouns? How much do they know about accessibility already? How does it affect them if we know? Sorry, like this is a really weird software I'm using and I'm kind of making weird moves here around the slides. So basically, the next important bit is to have a code of conduct so we can actually prepare people for the experience they're gonna have, okay? When they are interacting with us, engaging with us, we need to know what is an acceptable behavior, what is unacceptable behavior, how are we gonna handle issues. It's super important, especially online. In the era of offline training, we could just approach someone or in the break say, hey pal, maybe we should kind of look at the way you behave here. There are things that are not quite right and it's maybe upsetting somebody. Let's do something about that. It's not really that easy to do online. So everybody who's coming to my training classes has to sign up or basically accept the code of conduct that I have for them. Because otherwise, how would I know that they are going to behave, I like for people to have cameras on so I can look at them, I can see them. That helps me a lot in kind of measuring the temperature around the room, so to speak, the virtual room. These things you can also include in it. When you have a code of conduct, you can actually say, hey, you have to be polite, you have to be nice and friendly. That's like a shortened version. It also applies to you, of course, but it gives you a boundary, and boundaries are very important to work around. The other thing is, once you have a code of conduct, you can actually put it on your website and just kind of refer to it in future sessions, so you only do it once and it's done. Probably you will need to update it from time to time, but it's just gonna be there. The other thing for a great training, accessibility training in particular, where we have to care for accessible things is, Jesus, don't be boring, make the message palatable, right? Because sometimes it can be just so dreadful. Like I've seen sessions where you would just fall asleep after 2 minutes because somebody's trying to kill you with PowerPoint. If you have a sense of humor, you can actually kind of employ it. There's a very good observation here from P.F. Anderson. Requiring cameras on policy is an accessibility and equity barrier. Of course, I'm not requiring them to be on at all. I'm asking politely for them to be on if a person is comfortable with it. I would never require anyone to switch the camera on. But what I'm saying is, if the cameras are on, it's just easier to communicate sometime. However, naturally, if a person feels like they don't want to do it or they can't do it for whichever reason, that's no problem whatsoever. Having it written down, though, helps because people know what the expectation is and they kind of relate to that. They can relate to that in their most natural way. So coming back to the slides, I think it's very important to kind of have a little bit of sense of humor here and balance that with the message that you want to put across. Accessibility is a subject where we deal with a lot of, very difficult things. We talk about disabilities, we talk about unprivileged, we talk about systemic injustice. Of course, all these subjects are very, very serious, but this is probably even more so a reason for us to be a little bit less uptight at times and kind of to give our people who come to see us a more of a pleasurable experience, because sometimes things are just very hard for everyone and a little bit of a smile goes a long way. The way I'm looking at it, as I mentioned earlier, is I'm trying to tell stories of human experience, right? And I want to kind of give you two examples how we can talk about these things, right? You can talk about WCAG this way, that it's a set of guidelines that people should look at when designing digital systems. It has 4 sections: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Each section has a number of guidelines at 3 levels of conformance: A, AA, and AAA. These come with techniques and methods. Or you can say something like, when a person uses a website or an app, they have to be able to perceive it in a way that's most appropriate. They also have to operate it and understand it. And usually that kind of comes from robustness of it, if it works well. And there is a set of guidelines called WCAG, WCAG, that all designers, developers, and content folk, and other people who build digital systems can refer to make all of this work. It's split into 4 sections, just like that experience of a person: perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. And it comes at 3 levels of compliance from A to AAA, and we want our work to meet the AA level of these guidelines. So it's the same piece of information, but kind of giving to you more as a kind of, little story of how somebody could be using a machine, a computer, how could be interacting with it. And even if not, then just, in a more of a human way. What is really important here, I think, is to be always able to relate to that human experience, because otherwise what we are producing are people who are, who can quote WCAG by heart, but are unable to recognize a good experience from a bad one. I see that all the time. Or people who would religiously go for WCAG as for the Holy Grail without ability to discuss business limitations and user experience limitations on the side of UX design and budget constraints. We have to be flexible in how we talk about these things. Stories always bring more flavor in training. Of course, we can show stories of people using things, videos, YouTube is full of them. We can tell about our mom who's trying to pay her bills with a mobile phone, having arthritis, just kind of make it human. I sometimes ask people to use computers with just keyboard for 5 minutes. Of course, we can't simulate disability or, any serious condition this way, but even a little flavor of anything like that can actually make people empathize with what we are trying to do. And this kind of gets me to the next point. Show, don't tell. Learning by doing works best, right? So I'm finding that especially with highly technical subjects, people need to see things. So I do things for them and they see how it works, and then they do it themselves because I give them exercises to perform. And that is really helpful in making them understand what I'm trying to put across. Because, I can talk about a screen reader for 10 minutes, or I can just in 2 minutes show you how it works. And that makes a much bigger impression. I can try explaining ARIA, in abstract, accessible rich internet applications, or I can simply write a piece of code as we are sitting there at the training, and I can show you how this works practically. And it's really, really good. I can work on my own examples that I came up with out of nowhere, or I can actually work with a client's customer, like with a client's code base, if I'm actually doing a training for a customer, for a client. So that's really quite helpful. Sometimes people bring their own code and we discuss that, that's very useful. Use less slides, make it light, because death by PowerPoint is real. That's something that I also want to mention, because yeah, it is real. I mean, how many presentations have we seen when there's a person just sitting and reading from slides all the time and trying to kind of just put the message across, and we're falling asleep, and it's just not very good. Death by pie charts is also real. Pie charts are of course hard to understand, and they're not very detailed. Too much text, like there's so many things we can do wrong, but to kind of avoid that, just we need to remember that people learn very differently, and we learn very differently nowadays, especially. Even when I compare how the training worked a few years back and nowadays, is much harder sometimes, especially with younger people, to keep their attention for longer. It used to be easier, I think. Now we are all used to 5-second videos and frantic scrolling of Instagram and TikTok and whatnot. We are becoming rewired. So the good thing is we can actually work on that. We can we can learn from that. We can serve content in other ways. Make it like into micro chunks that are just easier and more palatable to consume by people who benefit from our training. And the other bit that I think is super important is to do things in the matter of group work. I think this can actually benefit anyone running any sort of online training. Naturally, it's nothing new, because if you were doing it in the times pre-online era, you would go into a room and you would split people into groups and they'll be doing things. But nowadays, majority of online conference platforms come with fantastic group work facilities, virtual rooms and whatnot. And you could actually be doing that work with people in groups, which is super, super useful, because people have to train. They have to, as I mentioned earlier, do things themselves. Otherwise, they're just going to forget everything. It'll evaporate from their hands. Irina asks whether we can get slides. Of course, you will get the slides. Absolutely no problem. I will send them to Luis either today or tomorrow, and that'll be sorted. So take it easy. So naturally, of course, when you think of group work, you also have to consider, and that kind of touches on accessible training in general, consider different capabilities of people who are connected. So like sometimes, for instance, it's very hard to have people in a room, separated room, if they live with a particular disability, that would rather require them to do to be more comfortable, in a kind of environment where they can disappear a bit more. In a group work setting, it's like they just have to do this or that. It might not be practical, it might not be possible, so you need to know who your people are that are coming to your training and kind of take that into consideration, obviously. But very often, more often than not, we can find a middle ground and do something with everyone, and that really does benefit the environment of learning a lot, massively, right? Now, I use liberating structures a lot. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. There'll be a link in my slides. Liberating structures is a set of practical approaches to group work, freely available. It's open source and anyone can learn them. They are quite easy for a facilitator, and the facilitating person doesn't even have to be like that very experienced to use some of them. And they allow for like the main idea in liberating structures is that they cut through hierarchy. So you can have in one room 20 people with different level of seniority, or maybe sitting in different places on the corporate ladder, or just being very different altogether, and they can find a way of working together in a way that would make them all content and kind of at the same level, and that's really, really awesome. Tolu Noah just inserted typed in the link to liberating structures. I would really recommend you to have a look at this website. So I use that a lot. It's much harder to do sometimes in an online setting, obviously, because liberating structures were meant to be used with large, sometimes very large groups of people in a kind of real world. But if you are smart about it, if you use some timers that are built into Zoom and Miro and whatever you are using, and if you use the room facility, you can actually very nicely do this. So yeah. The other thing that I think is super important when you want to do a training on a very difficult subject like web accessibility or something similar is to consider the flipped classroom model. Some of you might have heard about this, I'm sure, because lots of you are actually, very experienced educators, so you would know this. But for those who don't know, flipping classrooms mean basically, in a nutshell, obviously there are like intricacies to it, but in a nutshell, giving students the material to absorb prior to the actual training session. So if I, let's say, have a training with web developers and I need to go with them through ARIA, for instance, I have a number of videos that explain the subject that I am sending them prior to the training session, let's say 2 weeks earlier, or we can agree on the time. And then they are watching it, and when they are coming to the actual training, they are actually coming to a very practical session of exercises. We don't really talk about slides anymore, like I don't show them slides. We can of course discuss some of the videos that they have seen, or the methods, and I'll explain everything if I have to, absolutely. But in general, they are coming prepared to do the actual work, and that is super awesome. Why? Because a person can watch all of this at their own time, at their own pace. They can speed it up, they can slow it down, they can read the transcript if they prefer, if they don't want to watch the video. They have subtitles in, so they can watch the video as they are on the bus. It's just so very practical. They can rewatch it. So if I'm explaining something that's really difficult, if I were doing it in a classroom setting, it could be, I would just repeat it once or twice, and it can be too much. And like P.F. Anderson says, it's absolutely fantastic for folk with ADHD like myself. Actually, I love flipped classroom as well, because I can prepare prior to the session, and then I can just come to the session and I can get the practical training. That's a really, really, really good thing. I would really recommend, and it's a super easy thing to do. The only thing you have to do is to have a webcam, obviously, record some videos, put them up online somewhere. I have them on Vimeo, but you can do it anywhere, and boom, you have it done. Another practical thing is you can reuse them, of course. So that's great. Sometimes you can even remake them into an online course if you prefer that. There's like many possibilities here. The other thing is a recap, right? So this is something that I haven't seen too many people doing, and it's a super simple thing. And by no means I invented it or anything like that. I don't think I did. I'm sure there's other people doing it. I just don't see that too often. If I have a training session on something as complex as web accessibility or anything that is really like intense, what I would do is I would come back to the same group of people a month later. I would include it in the price of my training. It's not like an extra or anything. Sometimes I would do it for free. If the training was for free, then that's for free too. And I would come back to these people and I would actually give them a chance of implementing the skills that I have given them for a month or so, come back to them and talk with them about that. Any issues, any challenges, what have you done, how did you do it, how can I help, what can we do differently here, let's talk about something you've learned. And it's amazing because what this means, first of all, people are prepared that you will see them again. So they kind of think, oh, I'll have a chance to have my questions answered, but also they feel like I should actually look into this. Somebody will be coming and kind of talking with me. Of course, they don't have to come to the session, right? But most of them do. And very often we just talk about things that have happened in that time in between the training and the additional recap meeting. And it's a wonderful opportunity not only to network, connect with people again, see how they were doing, but also to give them that extra bit of confidence, because sometimes what happens is you would see that in lots of training where people would leave the room or your session like completely pumped. They'd be like, oh, this is like the best thing I've learned in a year. Wow, I'm just gonna do it. And the next day will be like that, and the next week will be like that, and then they will get another project or their boss would come and say, no, you're not doing this right now. That's like that, no, you just don't. Or they would be just tired with work or life or anything, and they would just go like, and that's it, sorted. That's your training gone. So that extra session really gives them something fantastic to look forward to, as much as the 10th tip, the recording. Again, this might go without saying, but I want to talk about this because many practitioners, many trainers I've been meeting over the years, they believe that they shouldn't be handing the recordings of their sessions over to the customer because that can then later become available in the web. People would download it for free, share it with colleagues for free, whatever. And I actually, like, to be honest, if somebody gets my training and the recording of it and sends it to 20 of their friends, I'm very happy about that. I don't mind. Really, that's just amazing. Like, not only 20 people are more interested in what I do, they are potentially maybe even clients sometime, but they actually have a chance to learn something fantastic and they'll see how cool it is to learn together and maybe they'll become inspired. I mean, this is just ace, right? So the only thing that I do is after I record the session, I actually put it somewhere and delete it after a month because I don't want to be creating just like, data hanging in the cloud indefinitely and servers burning energy and whatnot. I like knowing that people will download it, people who want to have it, and then I can delete it. So naturally, like, it's a bit harder if you work in groups a lot because particularly in Zoom that I use, you can record meeting rooms, separate rooms, virtual rooms, breakout rooms, but that has to be done by each person or like individuals in a particular room. So it's just not that handy. But it's useful. I completely hear you, P.F. Anderson. As a librarian, deleting content horrifies you. You say, and I'm not surprised. I mean, yeah, like, of course. At the same time, the way I'm looking at it is that this is just a preservation of a moment in time for these particular people who actually have access to all the slides. They paid for a session, they came, they learned. This is for the reference, and I'm basically giving them this material to keep indefinitely. So once they download it, it's on their hard drive and they can keep it. I'm not keeping it because I don't need it, right? I have my training slides, I have everything I needed. Whoever needs that training, they will be able to get it. And often I actually forget about deleting these videos. I'm talking about like I'm doing it every time, but sometimes they actually hang around my server for a year. But anyway, sharing is caring. Yeah, absolutely. So I share slides, I share training videos, I export Miro boards if I use them or anything like that for that matter. And I have a little 11th bonus point for you, which is make mistakes, right? I mean, that's just Super important. I make mistakes all the time. I probably have made some today, and I am okay with this because this is a part of a process of learning and teaching. I think we want perfection and we demand perfection from ourselves way too often. We live in a culture of like constant pressure, especially nowadays with all the AI and other things. Working at high speed, usually not really being paid handsomely enough for what we do anyway because of the overload and the toll that it all takes on our bodies and minds. So making mistakes is normal, right? Occasionally, I would lose the control of my screen reader or like forget its keyboard shortcuts. I would make spelling mistakes. There might be some on those slides. I don't know. I've checked them, but maybe there is something. I forget to record and suddenly I don't have 20 minutes of a session recorded because I just forgot. All these things are normal. Just be human. And I think, especially once again, when we are approaching such an intense subject as web accessibility and teaching it to people, we need to remember that it's expected to not be perfect there. Like you won't know everything. Like very often I'm faced with, a piece of code that I'm looking at for 10 minutes and I just don't know what it does because it's so badly written. And I just say, I don't really know how this works. I'm an expert in code and I don't know how this works. And that's okay. Like Irina here says, be human. And I think people really appreciate honesty, originality, and openness, and they just want to interact with humans. Everybody says nowadays that, or like you can read about that online, that AI is going to replace humans and whatnot. I actually think that nobody can replace human empathy and connection, and the connection is the key. Connection with people that are sitting there in front of you, even though they might be dispersed around the globe, really, as they are often. Then every session is an opportunity to build something that stays with them. The way I'm looking at it is if they remember me, then it means I've changed something for them. Prior to every session, everything, um, I'm basically trying to think of like how should these people feel, what do I want them to feel as they leave the session. Should they be inspired, should they be focused, maybe they should be more aligned as a team, maybe they need to be more confident, or maybe there's something else, right? And this is very important because if you think about that, it really makes a huge difference in how you are. I'm going to use the word selling, but not in terms of like selling for money, but like how you are selling the message to people. How are you actually putting the message across? And that's a part of that know your audience, of course. And naturally, P.F. Anderson says here that you have to be careful of cultural differences, of course. I mean, there's so many of them. I'm Polish in the UK. I've been here 20 years, and I still make such stupid mistakes on the basis of cultural differences. And that affects everyone everywhere, especially in the kind of interconnected world as we have today. No matter how much you try, what kind of an expert you are, you would still find yourself in situations where you'll say or do something that's maybe a bit weird or unappreciated. But this is the part of making a mistake. You just apologize, like be human about it. Because the same would happen to you the other day. It's absolutely okay. So that's me basically. I would be more than happy to answer some of your questions. I see one or two in the chat. We're gonna get to this, but if there's anything more that you want to ask, feel free to do it now, please. I will share the slides. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. There's my email address out there if you want to talk about anything in particular, require some training or anything. There is a website. I will just basically type it in uh, here for you. There's the company website. That's like company sounds big. That's just me, like my company. I work with my friends, and that's that really. I hope that was useful. I don't know. I mean, perhaps it was a bit different from everything you've seen before at this wonderful event, but I also think that I hope that every person would get something interesting out of it, maybe.
It is a little bit different from everything, but I think it's perfect. It adds so much to the event overall. So Wojtek, thank you so much. Oh, and can you share your website to you have it shared to hosts and panelists if you could share it to everyone.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
Yeah, of
okay.
course.
Like I was saying in the last
Yeah,
session,
this is it.
happens every
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, you see, making mistakes.
No problem.
Yeah. Right, that is lovely. Thank you. There is a question here, Luis. I just need to find it from Angelique. If you don't mind me answering, might be useful. So Angelique says, when with flipped learning formats, how do you have discussions or people who want to return to some key questions? Are there forums for the flipped learning course to interact? Also, how much content is too much content? That's a superb question. Really, thank you for asking it. So yeah, so the way I personally do this, I've been toying with many methods of interacting with participants of my training over the years at times when they are doing the flipped classroom videos. First, email groups, a long, long time ago. Then things like Slack, then LinkedIn, not great. Slack, it's not too bad, but the problem is it doesn't really keep the archive of messages unless you pay for it, and it's quite expensive. So at the very end, even though it doesn't keep the history too well either for new members, I'm actually using WhatsApp for this. I have created a community, and a person who's coming to the session, or who would buy a ticket to the learning session or anything like that, they would get a link to a WhatsApp group and they can sign in. And that would give them access to me and other people. So already we can facilitate some nice group action, and they can ask questions. But also, what happens sometimes if there's a lot of this material, in between serving it to people, I organize like QA sessions, like 15-20 minutes QA sessions where I connect to them on Zoom, with them on Zoom, and we talk about things. How much content is too much content? You just kind of have to judge it by experience, see what you are talking about, how big is the subject in general, and split it into chunks. I'm trying for all my online videos with lessons to be not longer than maybe like 10 minutes tops. Having said that, I occasionally produce one or two that are like 20-40 minutes. For instance, I've been doing a course on semantic HTML. It's recorded, people can buy it. It's in Polish, actually, this one. And most lessons are like 10 minutes, but there's one lesson that's like 45 minutes because I'm explaining how to actually test a particular feature, and it's quite involved and it just has to be long. So, it depends. Yeah, the website should be coming. Let me just, oh, yeah, okay, worked a third time. That might be just the DNS thing. It should work. Yeah, but that's how you find me. So anyway, hopefully that has answered the question. If there are any more, I'm more than happy to answer.
Hey, Wojtek, I want to know a little bit more about your background. How did and why did you get into accessibility? Um, you sound like you're a software engineer and even a UX professional. But what can you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I have a long and rather twisted history. So I at first I that was in the 90s. I just got hooked on the internet, and maybe unlike other folks in my school, actually back then, secondary school, instead of playing games, I was more into like just, hey, how can I actually build this thing, like how to build a website or whatever. So I that kind of took me into a career of web development for a number of years. And one day, I was working, like, for a while, I was working for a large telecommunications provider in the UK. And I was tasked with building this special control panel for broadband. Like, in early days of broadband, you would have like options to switch this port off, that port, like everything through the website, basically. It was like really, really technical and geeky. And so I built that panel, and I was like, oh, that's amazing. 250,000 people in the UK are using it. I'm so proud of myself, right? And then a few nights later, something didn't work with our broadband at home. And we had a broadband from the company where I worked at as a kind of free benefit. And my girlfriend at the time, she said, can you just go to that thing you've built and like switch it off, like, and on? And I went there and I couldn't do it. And I was like, Jesus, how do I actually use this thing? That's like it's not usable. This is insane. I have made a thing by a web developer for web developers. Like, my mom would never be able to use this. What's going on? And then I learned about something called usability. I was like, oh my God, like there's usability. Jesus, the next best thing. And that's how I got on that bandwagon. And for a number of years, I got kind of as far as being a lead UX eventually for a larger team in a digital agency in the UK. And then I changed my job and then it happened that I kind of earlier on I discovered accessibility, but I just decided to do a teaching job, and I started teaching at the software academy called Code Clan, which was an equivalent, Scottish equivalent, I mean Scotland, to General Assembly you might know from the US, or like Flatiron.
Mhm.
And teaching students there, I kind of discovered once again that I need to teach them accessibility as well because nobody else will. So I started doing that. That was like good 10 years ago or so. And from there, I went to just doing accessibility full time for myself as a consultant and a trainer. So what is quite strange here, I suppose, in comparison to many other people I'm meeting, is that I have this experience of like going through every single stage of like how you build a website into web accessibility at the end, which helps me a big deal because I have the technical knowledge, but I also have the knowledge of human-computer interaction, and and business knowledge because of my like kind of business positions in agencies and other companies, and consultancy that I've been doing for a long time. So that mix is just very helpful
Yeah.
in what I do every day.
I have another question, and I want to ask you this just because um, we don't have any much opportunity for speakers from outside of the US, but
Of course.
your perspectives in Europe as an accessibility professional, what do you see or perceive that might be different there than what might be
Hmm.
than different than the US?
So that's a very interesting question. I mean, I need to answer this, but first I should say that I see US changing rapidly and sadly not for better, and that is due to recent presidency and some certain decisions made.
Hmm.
And I do feel like it's impacting businesses a lot, and many of them, businesses that I would see being quite careful and observant in the past, are just, not really interested in accessibility anymore because they don't feel like they have to anymore,
Hmm.
which is a very sad thing because I always felt like US was ahead of everybody else in terms of like how they were forced partially, but also trying to do a very good job.
Yeah.
Now, Europe here, even a few years back, there was much less focus on web accessibility, especially in kind of Central Eastern Europe, where I'm from. But with the introduction of European Accessibility Act, it became more of a requirement. And yeah, companies and people do care a way more now. I still would say that there's a very little, like that caring doesn't always carry into actually wanting to pay for it, if you know what I mean.
Right.
uh, but there is interest, even though sometimes that interest might be forced by the current kind of legal situation. But we all look at the US in hope of things becoming different again, hopefully sometime soon, and for having our colleagues who work there more opportunities again, and sort so like obviously we're not here to discuss anything political, but let me just assure you that like I'm sure that all of you have their rights in their hearts in the right place, and I mean we work with accessibility, so diversity, inclusion, all these things to us are paramount, and yeah, I hope things would change soon. But I would say the European accessibility market is less mature than American one in many ways, but at the same time, because of it, it's maybe a little bit more courageous in like how to approach things, or experimental in how
Mhm.
things are done, and certainly, the impact of the EAA, European Accessibility Act, was big enough to trigger reactions from the community of disabled internet users. So what I mean by that is that more so than before, I now see people actually making complaints to regulators and saying, "Hey, this website of a bank or this website of a TV station doesn't work for me and is making my life difficult. Can they fix it?" And then a company receives a letter, "Please fix it." And so like there aren't too many lawsuits as such, but I think because of the nature of how the European Union works, there's more natural willingness to follow some of the government regulation. If somebody from the government tells you do this, you kind of go like, "Oh, okay, I really have to do it," before we get into the nasty bits. So that's really the major difference. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Mm.
All right. Well, I'm looking. I didn't see any other questions now. I
That's
do
okay.
love how your session fits in with this event overall, and also with, with the content on the AIDC website altogether. I appreciate your perspectives, and so thank you so much, Wojtek, for taking the time out to share with us. And now back to your little baby.
That's exactly the plan. We'll be putting him to bed very soon. Hopefully, it's not gonna take too long. I'd appreciate that. Thank you very much for having me, folks. Like I said, Luis, I'll share my slides and all the other things. Just give me some time so I can, like wake up eventually and do it. But it was lovely to be here with all of you. Thank you for such thoughtful questions. If there is anything that comes to your mind, feel free to email me anytime. Find me on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to have a conversation. All the best. Enjoy the rest of this wonderful event. Have a good day. Take care.
Thanks. Thanks, Wojtek. Bye bye.